This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Fall means back to school, and even if you haven't been a student for ages, it is the perfect time to grab a pencil and hone your storycraft skills. I've got new workshops and group coaching sessions open for enrollment now at wordessential.com. And welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. I have a very special episode for you today because the table is turned. I am in the hot seat, and we have a guest host, Lainey Cameron, an amazing author and podcaster and huge supporter of writers of all stripes and especially of women's fiction. Lainey Cameron is a digital nomad and author, a recovering tech industry executive. Her 15-time award-winning novel, that's right, I said 15 and counting. Her novel, The Exit Strategy, was inspired by a decade of being the only woman in the corporate boardroom. A digital nomad, Lainey is an avid Instagrammer and loves to share her travel tips and insights with readers. Originally from Scotland, Lainey has a soft spot for kilts and good malt whiskey. So I got to tell you, Lainey Cameron is somebody you want to follow and find and connect with. She is the longtime host of the Best of Women's Fiction podcast, and she's got a new podcast just out this year called The Best of Book Marketing. She and her co-host Paulette showcase what's worth your time, what is just hype, and what fellow authors learned along the way. So I know Lainey because this year when I was getting ready to relaunch A Stone's Throw after unpublishing it and it not existing in the public realm for several years, I took Lainey's 12 weeks to book launch success. When you are ready to launch a book, you will want to sign up for her book launch success workshop. I cannot recommend it highly enough because above all else, Lainey is one of those people who shows up and delivers and goes above and beyond. And those are the kinds of people and writers I want to have in my community. Definitely check out Lainey Cameron. We will have links in the show notes to her website. Now, I feel incredibly fortunate that Lainey was able to sit down with me and talk about A Stone's Throw. I had so much fun chatting with her about the book. I hope you enjoy this week's episode of the Storyworks Roundtable.
Hey, Alida, I am so excited to be here and to chat with you about A Stone's Throw because I was lucky enough to be an early reader and get to read this book before a lot of people, I think.
Yes, well, thank you, Lainey, for doing this. I can't wait to have this conversation. Can't imagine a better guest host to interview me and to get me talking about this book because, I'm one of those introverted authors who hates talking about myself. So I feel like I'm in good hands.
And isn't it funny that we can talk about other people's books all day, but then when someone asks us to summarize our own, I don't know about you, but I just kind of go blank and go it's a book and it's really good. And well, I don't say that. I'm the opposite. I minimize it kind of like you do. But in this case, it is really good. I loved A Stone's Throw. I particularly liked how you had this whole, I don't know how to say it, this mix of women's community and art and magical realism and a little bit of a mystery going on in the book. You weren't bound by, I can only be one genre and do one thing. And you had so much going on, and yet it all works really well as one beautiful read. So congratulations on writing something that came together so beautifully.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't have genre in mind when I wrote it, and maybe that is a strength of the book. I didn't sit down to think I want to write women's fiction. And I don't think I even knew what women's fiction was when I sat down to write it. It was just a contemporary story in my mind. And I didn't think I want to write magical realism. I just had this image of a woman coming out of a painting. I think a lot of writers, the story's genesis is in some kind of image or feeling or some nugget of an idea that is behind the entirety of the story. And so, thinking of it crossing genre lines, it just turned out that way because that was the story that wanted to come forth.
And do you want to tell people who are not familiar with the book a little bit more about it? Because it is hard to describe, right? It's got some magical realism. It's got a woman who steps out of a painting. In fact, more than one woman who step out of a painting. Do you want to give people a little bit of a sense if they haven't heard anything about the book yet? Like, how would you describe it?
So there are two female protagonists, Simona, who is a painter in Minneapolis, and Gemma, who is a homemaker in London. And Simona discovers that she's pregnant just as she gets a massive arts commission to paint this huge mural in a new women's resource center. Gemma has had difficulty getting pregnant. So Simona never imagined herself as a mother. Gemma wants nothing more than to be a mother. And as Simona starts working on this mural, the women's community she never had and never knew she needed comes forward. So the women she's painting, these portraits in this mural, come to life. Gemma has this sort of mystical bond with Simona through painting, through art. And so both of these women, a motherless child, Simona, and then a childless mother, Gemma, grow and I think are healed through this experience of a women's community that's the magical realism. They're these women coming out of a painting.
And she's getting so much wisdom from these women. They're not just like they step out the painting and say hi. They're advising her. They're giving her wisdom. They're helping her navigate this really difficult moment in her life where she didn't expect to be pregnant and she's trying to navigate through it. Meanwhile, you've got Gemma, who kind of has put too much on pregnancy and has built her whole identity around the idea of being a mother and yet isn't. And so now she's kind of having to deal with like, what is my identity? If I can't be a mom, a natural born mom, what am I to the world? Who am I to the world? Is that really all I want out of life? And I love that you built this bond between the two women that they don't understand. Like, Gemma doesn't understand why she's having these strange dreams about, the painting and being an artist. And so it's really interesting in that it's totally credible. I love when someone writes a book that has these elements of magical realism. And I never once stopped and went like, oh, come on, like, this is silly. Like, this is not credible, which could happen so easily, right? In a book that has people stepping out of a painting and magical realism and people with a bond and dreams. And like, it could so easily be that you're reading this going like, oh, come on, give me a break. And not once in this whole book did I was so engrossed with the actual story and what was going on with the characters that I never really stopped to think about what was and wasn't within the realm of reality and possibility, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense. And I'm thrilled to hear you say that that is the goal, right? To have a story that is realistic, that is completely believable and engrossing, such that when people encounter the magical, they just accept it. It's just part of the world and part of these characters' lives. And then hopefully it becomes a part of our lives because we take this journey through the characters. We live the story vicariously through our characters.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I want to touch on what you said about identity, because that is such a big part of the story for me. Simona is the artist who's successful and she gets this breakout commission and life throws her, life is upended when she discovers she's pregnant. And it's a happy thing, right? But it's a choice she has to consider and make for herself and think about what it means for her as an artist and a single woman and all of those things that go with discovering you're pregnant. And then Gemma, as you said, has wrapped up her sense of self in this idea of being a mother. And it's the thing that life is withholding from her. It's the thing she can't seem to have,
Right. And it poses some great questions about like, who are we when we can't have the thing we think should define us, right? Like in the way she wants it, right? There's many ways to be a mom, but she wants to give birth, right? And so like when you can't have the thing you want, how do you get past that? I think it raises really interesting questions, and it was a really interesting journey to go on with her. And I love that she does grow and go through that journey and work out what she wants and what that alternate vision of her life is. And it has some art in it, which didn't start at that point, right? I think learning from her shared experience with, the transatlantic connection. So with Simona, I am just fascinated on your inspiration. So how do you come up with something which has so many different elements to it? I hear you say you started with the painting and the idea of someone stepping out of a painting. But from there, how do you get to a book like this with so many beautiful things in it?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure. When we start writing a novel, long form fiction, there are these stepping stones. And, it's been quite a few years since I wrote the first draft of this book and was really doing that development work. But, at some point I decided, okay, Simona has Italian immigrant parents. And looking back, why Italian? I probably said, because Northeast Minneapolis had an Italian population, so we'll go with Italian. It wasn't like I have Italian ancestry or know a ton about that. You make these decisions and one thing leads to the next. And so the characters develop and the story develops as one decision builds on the next. And so, yeah, that's a really awful answer.
It makes sense. It makes sense. It makes sense. Like, let me ask you about a specific element in it. So like this idea of community, right? That this community of women steps in to support Simona just when she needs it. Like I know community is really important to you, and maybe you could even talk about some of the different communities that you host and are part of. But like that clearly is something that is important to you that made its way into the book in a different way than you've experienced it necessarily, but it's clearly a theme that is important, therefore it's in the book. Like how did it make its way in there, and how does that intersect with your love of community?
Yeah, I think so. My mother has 9 siblings, and so growing up, there'd be these family gatherings at grandma's house around the lake, and you'd see the men kind of out in the yard doing their thing, and you'd see the women in the kitchen doing the food thing, and the children running around back and forth. And I think that made an impression on me. And then I'm also very interested in history. I have a degree in anthropology. And so community and culture and networks within community, the idea of women's work, there's the quilt in the mural and kind of a vision of a quilting bee, and women's work, not in a demeaning sense of this is what women do and that's what men do, but in the sense of coming together and creating something. And it's not just the act of creation that's important, but it's the act of support, of communion that happens when women specifically come together, whether it's in the kitchen over the food, like at family gatherings, or whether it's something in the arts and crafts realm, like the quilting bee. And so as Simona painted this mural, I didn't just want one woman to come out to be a mentor to her. I wanted a community of women to come out and to cross generations and to have a variety of experiences so that the nurturing and mentoring that Simona and Gemma both receive is from a community source, right? It's not individual. And I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, but my sense of things is that this is something we aren't in touch with as women, at least not the way we perhaps used to be at one time, as women's work sort of went away. It wasn't something we do. Communities disperse, children move away from their homes, things, even before things went digital. there was something to that I was tapping into in writing this story and wanting to explore for myself, right? Because as a writer, I don't write a story because I have the answers. I write a story because I'm curious and I want to explore and I want to make discoveries. And so some of that is, what would it be like if you could sit down with a group of women, different women with different experiences, and you could share their stories and you could learn from them and they could learn from you. And, how different would we be as women, as artists, as mothers, as we're on this journey of finding our identities and shaping them? So
I can totally relate to that. I love it. Like, I've been a member of various women's circles myself, and those have meant a lot to me, but also the writing community, where I've been part of so many different groups and communities that have supported each other of all sexes and all genders in the writing community. But it's something that I can relate to the power of and that I'm so appreciative of. I just celebrated my 4-year anniversary of my debut novel coming out, and I really was like thinking about in 4 years, all the different people who have touched me, who have supported me, who have helped me along the way, before the book came out too, but after the book in the last 4 years. And it was kind of a moment of just absolute gratitude for me, thinking about those different communities that I've been lucky enough to intersect with and the different people in the different communities. So I can relate to what you're saying. And also the quilt analogy got me thinking. I mean, I know this is cliched, but I'm thinking about like, you go back in time and what communities of women would gather and do these group projects like quilts. And then what's the equivalent of a guy? I'm in the English countryside right now. It's like going out with your gun to shoot some pheasants. It's like the opposite. It's a very single solitary thing versus doing a community-based activity. So I know that's the extreme version, but that's what I was thinking of right now. Looking out the window at this beautiful English countryside, I'm thinking of shooting pheasants for some reason. So
yes, well, I think the barn raising might be, because I had that thought some time ago, like, what would be the male equivalent of this? And I thought maybe the barn raising, where men in the community come together and they create something, and it's handiwork, right? It's tangible.
Yeah.
This thing that you have at the end show of it. But then there's also the camaraderie and the more experienced people teaching the younger people. So the mentoring process. And yes. Yeah. And just I'll second what you said about the writing community. I love the writing community.
So one of the other themes, I was just thinking about this idea of art and the struggle with art and creativity comes through a lot, right? Simona is on a timeline with another big life event, the pregnancy happening. And I thought you did a nice job of portraying some of the challenges of an artistic life. And then Gemma, the other character who had wanted to be a mother, hasn't really pursued the artistic life. She's kind of set it aside and said, that's not for me, the creative life. But maybe it is for her after all. And she's going to start wondering that, asking herself that question. I thought you did a lovely job of portraying some of those nuances around the creative life. Is that something that comes directly from your own experience?
Well, sure, as a writer, but I'm not a visual artist. I am very crafty, so I'll have my seasons where I take on something that's a physical, tangible handicraft, like clay or knitting or sewing, So I have a lot of experience with arts and crafts in that sense. But I think any creative person knows what it's like to struggle with your identity as a creative person. And so Simona has made it. She's been validated. She's got pieces in galleries. She's not only competitive, but she won a major commission, whereas Gemma went to school for art, and we learn she was so technically precise. She could actually do forgeries, right? But she wasn't getting the validation for her own work, for her own, like, she wasn't discovering or tapping into her genius. She was just very technically skilled. And so, as you said, she set art aside, I think, because disappointment won out. And part of her journey is rediscovering her love for art and deciding to own it, right? Who am I? Am I an artist? If I'm an artist, what does that look like? What voices do I listen to? right? And where does empowerment come from? It doesn't, and by empowerment, of course, it's an internal thing, but the support, the encouragement that we need to help us get that initial boost. And it doesn't always come from where you expect it to, So Jenna's got a real life female friend in the story, not just the women stepping out of the mural who plays an important role.
So talk to me, this is very related, about your own process. I'm fascinated for a book like this that has these kind of interwoven threads. Did it change a lot over time? Do you write like one draft and refine it? Or are you like, the first draft is just I'm finding my story, and then the later drafts, you know what the story is? Like, what does that process look like for you?
I think the first draft tends to be very messy. I do a lot of discovery writing and a lot of journaling and a lot of exploring the characters and who they are and their voices. And so I might not write scenes in order in that first draft. I might do writing where I'm really just focusing on a setting. I discover things through that writing. Like, I'm not a fish person. I've never owned a goldfish. Couldn't really care less about fish as pets. But Simona's got a fish tank, and I don't remember where that came from, what the inspiration was. But at some point, you're journaling and you're thinking about this apartment she lives in, and well, it's an artist's loft in this particular part of the city, and what would she have in there? What would be her space and her life and her, comfort, her desires? And so fish came up, and then that's something that you see whenever you're in her apartment, right? It becomes something that recurs in the story. And so, I don't know, maybe I'm getting off track from your question. Let's just say it's like, in the drafting process, the story is coming to me through these little discoveries, right? And then once you discover it and say yes to it, you work it. So
it's like coming from the micro almost. Like, I love what you're saying. It's almost like the small thing, which is what would be in her apartment, leads to a fish tank, but then that leads to more of a metaphor of what does the fish tank represent in the book. And so I like that. It's coming from the small to the big, right? The small idea then kind of grows into something more. That's really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard anyone describe it that way. That's unusual to me. And I've done, 150 episodes of the Best of Women's Fiction podcast where I interview women's fiction authors. And so it's actually interesting to me that I've never heard anyone describe it quite like that. I love that. One of the things that I've been wondering is, you are involved and you have the podcast and so many different communities that you engage with as a writer. Has what you learned either from guests on the podcast or from other writers influenced your own writing or your own process at all?
I think the best, so it's been said a million times before, but we learn so much by teaching. And so if anything over the years has influenced my process other than doing, right? Learning by doing, it's teaching, because my coaching clients and my workshop students and such, they come with questions, they have their problems, and then I have to help them find an answer or find a way to describe this craft thing that communicates with them and helps them solve their problems. And I come up with exercises specific to the question I'm asked all the time. It's always something new where I'm like, okay, this is what they need to solve. What example can I come up with? What exercise can I give them? So every time I do that, I'm also giving myself a more refined understanding. So even though I might be the teacher and the knowledge is coming out of me, in communicating it, I'm refining it and I'm developing it. And then that goes back into my own process.
I can see that. Like, for me, it's when I do beta reading. If I'm beta reading someone else's work, I can see like the challenge of a certain thing and how to fix it much more easily than I could see it in my own work. It seems so much harder when it's my book. When it's someone else's book, I'm like, oh, that's how you do that really well. Okay, yeah, now I get it. Or
Yes.
that's how that doesn't work and how to fix it. But it's so much harder when I'm looking at my own work than when I'm looking at someone else's. It's very clear when I'm looking at someone else's work. I can see exactly how to help. It's fascinating.
Mhm. It is fascinating. Yeah. And so true. So true.
So I have a question I've been fascinated by, which is the title of the book, A Stone's Throw. Can you tell us more about the genesis and anything you're willing to disclose without any spoilers? No spoilers whatsoever here.
Okay. Well, so there's a line, and gosh, it's not flagged. I couldn't tell you where it is, but Simona is reflecting on the effect her choice has had on other people's lives, right? And how it's like you throw a stone into a pond and you think you're just throwing a stone into a pond, but it ripples. It ripples out and has the effects. And so, her relationship with Peter, Gemma's husband, her baby's father, how this is going to affect Gemma's life, there are just so many connections that we have that we don't necessarily think about in life. We go through life feeling like we're this little capsule, right? Walking down the street and we bump into this or we bump into that. But if you stop and really think about it, the things we do have ripple effects in ways we might never discover, but we're all connected.
I love that. One of my favorite coffee shops, it's a Starbucks in Santa Cruz near where my mom lives, has a big board that says, you never know what someone else is going through today. Like you don't know when you encounter someone, in a random coffee shop, and just be kind because you don't know what's happening in someone else's life. And and this is not what the board says, but the way I interpret it is you being really mean and skipping the line and like, get out of my way, person, because I'm busy today. You don't know if you have a ripple effect that person was already having a horrible day and you just sent them over the edge. Or the other way around, someone's having a horrible day and you smile and say hello and it's lovely to see you here. And it makes a difference in their life because you don't know what's going on in their head right now. And they might be in a really, really bad place. And so like, I do believe that the tiny, tiny stuff that we do has a huge effect and that it can be much more than we think. It's actually kind of a heartening thought because, when you think about like, how am I going to solve world peace? And the world is, just a blown up mess right now. And these are things that are so big that we can't do anything about them. At least I can't. And so being able to say like, maybe just being nice to someone in the lane in the coffee shop has a ripple effect. And actually that person has something else that they're doing, then that leads to something else. And like, no, I'm not solving the war, but maybe I'm making a tiny difference that leads to someone else's difference. And so like, I just like to think that it's a way to feel a little less overwhelmed in a world where we can't control the bad stuff that's happening, if that makes any sense.
Right. Oh, it definitely does. Like, oh, I just put my stone in the pond and now look at how many people I'm touching.
I like it. I like it a lot. As someone who's been involved with various women's groups, I like that concept a lot. And I think we can support each other and also kind of acknowledge that we have a bigger impact than we realize sometimes. Like one of the things I did recently is I stepped back from hosting the first podcast that I had called The Best of Women's Fiction, which was talking to authors like yourself. And I love doing that. But the reason I stepped back is I felt like I had a second podcast called The Best of Book Marketing, which I wanted to create. And that would have a bigger effect in more people's lives. It was literally that simple. I felt like if I helped authors with marketing their books, those authors would go on to help other authors. And marketing is such a horrible thing that authors hate doing. And so like, it just felt like the ultimate impact of me putting my time towards doing that would be bigger and greater than me putting my time towards interviewing individual authors. And the good thing is my podcast is not going away. The Best of Women's Fiction will keep going with new hosts starting in the fall and a very exciting announcement to come. But I'm very excited that my new podcast, all about book marketing, I just feel like the ripple effect that can have when authors get help and they realize how to talk to readers and they realize how to get their work out there, then more readers get excited, more authors get excited, they help other authors. It just, to your point, right? It's not just the one author who listened to the podcast. It's that ripple of everything that it can help going forwards. And that was very kind of obvious to me.
I love that you're thinking about that you made that decision with a conscious awareness of the effect you can have and how many people you can help. And I think, this touches back on something we said at the very beginning about how readers live these experiences with the characters. They go through the journey with the protagonist vicariously. And so if we think about a stone's throw, maybe there is somebody struggling to have a child the way Gemma is. And in reading this book, she feels less alone, right? So the ripple effects are myriad. I mean, there's so many ways that books touch people's lives and bring people together. And so what you're saying about you have this podcast about book marketing, it helps authors reach more readers. I mean, the web, the ripples going out around the world. It's huge.
Exactly. And helping authors also see it the way you just described it, which is I have something to offer the world in my writing, and it's going to help people, and it's going to touch some readers exactly where they need right now. And it changes your perspective of kind of talking about your book, right? So I try very hard. I mean, you and I have been in several things together. I try very hard to get authors past the thinking that you're selling your book to people who don't want it. That is absolutely not what you want to do, right? You're doing it all wrong if that's what you're doing. Talk to people who don't want your book and telling them why they want it. You're actually just helping the right readers connect. You're helping the people who will be moved by your book find it. And so it feels different when you see it that way. You're actually more like a matchmaker trying to help the right readers who will love the book find it instead of just pushing it out the door and pushing it at people, because that just feels icky, right? Like, buy my book. Oh, none of us are having to say that.
No. And who wants to hear it? Right?
Exactly. But a matchmaker, like there's some readers out there whose lives are going to be touched and bettered by your book. Now, how do you help them find the book? That's a much nicer way to think about it, right?
Right. Much nicer. Yes. Yeah.
So when you think about the readers who are going to be touched or going to really enjoy this book, obviously everybody listening to your podcast should read this book, but obviously, and I'm allowed to say it because it's awesome. But are the readers who you think of that you're thinking like these readers are particularly going to love this? I wish someone with this profile or with this life experience would pick this book up and read it. Are there particular readers that you think of that you have in your head?
Women, obviously, because this is so much about women's community and women's identity. But I have had men read this and really enjoy it and share with me that they did enjoy it. So I don't say women to exclude men. It's a character-driven story about relationships and life changes and difficult decisions. And the shape that takes in this story is around marriage and pregnancy and creativity and, deciding who we are. Peter, the man in the story, also has a point of view. And although he's a lesser character than Simona and Gemma, he has to make a hard decision too. Does he stay with his wife? Is he loyal to the life he's built for years with one person? Or does he choose an entirely different life for himself, a new path? And what does it mean that there's this pregnancy, there's a baby involved? And so whether we're artists or not, whether we've ever been pregnant or not, right, we can all connect with hard decisions and hitting those moments in life where the choice we make alters the course our life takes. And all three of them have to make those choices.
I love it. That's beautiful. Like the book. And I particularly appreciate it just personally because I wrote my first novel about a wife and a mistress who are entangled with the same man. And one of the things I really like about your book is you don't pit the women against each other. There's this cliche, right? That if ever you get to a scenario where two women are in some way involved with the same guy, that it's going to become this like duke it out, go at each other. Neither are capable of rational thought if you watch the movies. And I love the fact that you wrote two smart, sensitive, empathetic women with careers, with a life, with aspirations, and you didn't make it all or only about the guy in the book. And so to me, even though he has a point of view, these two women are fully functioning humans. They're not like cliches of a wife and a mistress who are the same guy, right? They're not like paper cutouts, right? And I thought you did that really well. And I love that you made it about them and their journeys. And so that was just something that really appealed to me and how you approach the topic.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, It's a story with the love triangle, but it's never been about the love triangle. It's never, it's about these choices. And
So I know we're getting to the end of our time here, and this has been a fascinating discussion. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you particularly like to talk about relative to your book, to your writing career, your communities, anything we haven't talked about?
oh gosh, I don't know. I'm starting to revise The Murder in Scott Hall. So most people, I don't know, maybe most people don't know. I guess my podcast listeners probably already know this. This is a re-release. So this is a second edition. And then I've got a ghost story, murder mystery. So another crossing genre story, also with a strong female protagonist at a crossroads in her life. So I'm revising that and plan to get it out yet in 2024. So look for more novels coming soon.
So if people go get this one right now, they're potentially going to get another one they can read this year yet from you.
Yes. And also, since I'm plugging myself and blushing as I do it, check out my Substack, A Room Full of Books and Pencils, because one of the things I'm going to be announcing is sort of a book club call. So if you read A Stone's Throw and then you follow me on Substack, you'll find out about the dates and how to get on the call, and then just come hang out, chat, have kind of a book club conversation with the author about A Stone's Throw. So
I love that. And if anyone's listening and they have a book club, this would be an amazing book club book. Are you willing to do like Zooms where you zoom in and join a book club for a discussion?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Connecting with readers is the best part of putting a book out there in the world. Yes.
I love it. And if people are listening to this, and most people will be on your podcast, but if they're not already following your podcast, where's the best place to find you and learn more about your work?
So Alida Winternheimer.com. So that's my author website. So if you've got the book, you can spell that that nice long name there. Otherwise, booksandpencils.substack.com. That's where I've got my newsletter, and I write about life, writing, and the writing life.
This has been an absolute joy to chat with you, and thanks for making time to do this.
Well, thank you, Lainey. Anytime you want to be a guest host at the round table or want to come chat with us, please do. I'm so honored that you were willing to interview me. My newsletter, A Room Full of Books and Pencils, is growing every week with new reflections, writing tips, and transcripts of the podcast. It's also where I make announcements about things like upcoming writing workshops and coaching sessions. Check out A Room Full of Books and Pencils at booksandpencils.substack.com. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.